What's up and welcome back, guys, to another episode of Smalls That Sell, and this episode is going to be a summer edition. So now is the time to be focused on making and selling items for the outdoors. For those of you that are new to the channel and wondering what all of this is about, is basically we take hot, popular items from the big box stores, we break those down, that way that you can make those at home for yourself for a fraction of the price, or by knowing how something is made, you can put your own twist to it, make your version, and sell those items for crazy high profit margins. So I have several things to cover, so let's go ahead and jump into this first one. This first one caught my eye because it's pretty cool, and I'm seeing several different versions of this on several different sites, which means they are popular and people are buying them. And that hot item right now is balcony tables. Okay, so some people call these balcony tables, some people call these fence tables, you know, where you can actually set it over the edge of the fence, and then you'll have a table, like if you're outside playing games. You can set your drinks, food, keep score, whatever you would like on these movable tables that will hang off of a fence or railing of some kind. This particular one that I'm going to break down is actually made for balconies, but keep in mind that you can do the exact same thing with a fence. You may just have to change a couple of things with the dimensions. So this $165 folding balcony table has a super high rating and tons of reviews, which means, again, people are buying these things. So the reason why I chose this one is because it actually collapses in on itself. Now again, there are other versions like this one that are just made to set over the fence. You could actually take away the moving parts on the one that I'm about to break down and do the exact same thing. But to me, the moving parts are what makes this cool because it can fold up to a super slim design. So the overall dimensions of this thing is 27 inches wide by 16 inches deep. Okay, so let's take a look at this thing and actually see what type of material that they've used. Looks like the slats themselves are about 1.5 inches thick by about 1/2 inch. The frame for this thing, for the most part, it looks like that it's about 3/4 by 1.5 inches. Pretty much everything in this build we can make out of 2x4, 2x6 material. So we can actually build this thing for really cheap. The most expensive part about this build that I'm seeing will be these hinges, and the cheapest place to find those are going to be on Amazon. Let's talk about this back support, because the tabletop is going to be attached to that, and that's going to be attached to your railing or your fence. So the two back legs that's 25 inches tall looks like that it's 3/4 by 1.5 inches. So we can just use our 2x4, 2x6 material and rip that down into 3/4 inch strips. That crossbar in the middle, that's 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. So the same board, just reset your saw, cut 1.5 inches by 1.5 inch strip. And then you can't see it, but there has to be something straight up above that center support bar that will support that tabletop whenever it folds down, because the tabletop itself is hinged. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be another one of these 2x2s or 1.5 by 1.5. So whenever you're making that center one, just go ahead and make 2 of them, install one in the middle, then install your top one about 4 to 6 inches from the top of your legs. Now these are all designed for assembly at home, so you're actually using these round Allen head bolts to install these 2x2s. Unless you're planning on chipping these things, I would just use some wood glue, pre-drill, and throw in some screws. So the back frame itself is done with very little material. As far as attaching this to the railing, that's all that they have done is gone down a couple of inches from the top of the two backboards and drilled a bolt hole through that. And they've taken a 27-inch piece of the exact same material, the 3/4 by 1.5 inches, and then drilled bolt holes through that. Looks like the bolts themselves are probably around 4 inches long. They've used regular nuts on the end. I would actually use wing nuts. That way you can put it on and take it off pretty easy. But essentially you just put it through the railing, install this onto the back, then tighten up your nuts, securing everything to the railing itself. Now, if this was going over a fence, I'd bring these back 2 legs up and actually make hooks to hang this thing on. So now that we know how they've framed up this back and how it actually attaches to the railing, let's move on to these triangle-shaped fold-in tabletop supports. So just picture the tabletop gone, and here you have these 2 supports that will actually fold inside of the frames. So that's 27 inches wide, not counting the material, and then fold out to support that tabletop. The tabletop itself is about 16 inches wide. So in order for those supports to be able to fold inside of that frame, they can't be any wider than, I'd say, around 12 inches at the top. And whenever they're folded out, it's going to provide plenty of support for the tabletop. So to make these swinging arms, this horizontal piece, this piece right here, I'll go ahead and cut that to 12 inches wide. And then the angled piece, again, we have 45 degrees on both sides. And then you would just cut this angled support to where we have 12 inches from this tip to this tip, because the top of this is actually part of the support. And then for this inside piece, one end of it's just going to be a 90-degree cut, and this other side of it's going to be another one of these 45-degree cuts, just turned upside down. If it were me, I'd just put those 3 pieces together using pocket holes, but you can use whatever joinery that you'd like. Then once you have your 2 arms made, you would just attach those to your back frame using hinges. And you can see by the way that they've attached these hinges, these supports are actually inset, kind of like this. So there'll be a hinge here. That way, whenever this hinges in, it's flush with the back support, which will allow this top to hinge down, folding flat. So speaking of the top, how did they make this? Again, they've started off using the 1.5 by 3/4 material and just made a frame using butt joints. If this tabletop is 16 inches by 27 inches long, I'd actually make this inside frame maybe like a 15 by 26, and by bringing that in 1 inch in all directions, that's going to allow us a 1/2 inch overhang in all directions. I would just make a little rectangle box, use wood glue, brad nails, and you could throw some screws in there if you would like. And then once you have that made, you would add your slats. And again, these slats, they look like that they're about 1/2 inch, 3/8, whatever thickness that you like to use. It really doesn't matter, but they're about 1.5 inches wide. So we can use that same 2x material to get these thin strips. Cut these at 27 inches long, leave a 1/2 inch of overhang on each side, and then just use equal spacing for each one of your boards. You can install this with just some wood glue and brad nails like they did, or you can use exterior screws. Then the last step will be to attach your tabletop to your top back support using a hinge on each side, allowing the tabletop to just fold down whenever the arms are folded in. So that may have actually sounded like a lot, but if you think about it, you can build this entire thing out of 2x4 material, 2x6 material, super cheap wood, and there are only a few different dimensions of the material. Once you build one of these, you will be able to knock these things out in no time. And again, they're wanting $165 for these. That may be a little high in your area, or it may be just right. But regardless of where you're at, I don't think that you will have any issues getting at least $100 a piece out of these. All right, so you guys know that I love doing builds that solve problems, be it space saving or home and shop organization. Well, there's one problem that I have not been able to come up with a solution for yet, and that's almost everything in our lives has to be charged, be it in our homes or workshops. At any given time in this shop, I have several things charging at any available outlet. Well, the sponsor of today's video has solved that problem, so check this out. The Duracell Portable Charging Hub M150. So I've been using the M150 for a bit now, and I am loving it. Not just the fact that I can quickly charge my devices in one place, but did you catch the portable part? The M150 can be with you where you need it, when you need it. And I haven't even gotten to the coolest part yet. The tiltable magnetic lid holds your phone while charging it, giving you that third hand we always wished we had, so we can follow along with projects, work through plans, phone a friend for advice, and even answer those calls that always seem to come in at the worst time. And at the end of the day, just store away your cords and set it back onto its charging dock, and the M150 will be ready for whatever adventure tomorrow holds. So make sure to click the link in my description to get powered up with the Duracell Portable Charging Hub M150. Whether you're trying a new recipe on the grill or a project in the shop, the Duracell M150 is the perfect solution to empower your creativity. Okay, so this next one caught my eye because it is a perfect summer build and it's a bench. As we have talked about before, everyone loves benches. We're always needing some extra room for people to sit or to stage up different styles of decorations. So one of the few things that caught my eye with this one was the shape. So it actually looks like the bench that is built onto a picnic table, except there's no picnic table. Now, what would actually be really cool is if you made a couple of these and then made the table itself. Everyone hates crawling in and out of the fixed seats on the picnic tables. It's like you're sticking your legs in a trap or something. That would be a super neat idea that I have not seen yet. And then the other thing that caught my eye about this was they were offering this on several different sites and in several different colors. Because these things are not custom orders, they're having to make thousands of these at a time, and to make so many different colors of this, it means that they're having no problems moving these things. When a product first comes out, you'll usually only see it in one color, and once that company sees that it's going to take off, you'll start seeing stuff like this where they offer it in several different colors. So this bench is 17 inches tall, 44 inches long, and 11 inches deep. So let's go and start with this bench top. So we know that it's right around 11 inches deep, and you can tell by looking at this that everything is 1.5 inches thick. They've used 2-inch material on this just like they would on a regular picnic table. So since this bench is 11 inches wide, that means that they have used a 2x6 for this top. Since a 2x6 is actually 5.5 inches wide, and they've used 2 boards for this seat, that's what they've used. They've taken a single 2x6, which is less than $5 right now, and then cut 2 44-inch boards out of it. So we know the material that they've used for the top, but they probably did not install the top until the 2 legs were done. So let's go ahead and make these legs. For the 4 legs of this bench, that's all that they have used is 2x4 material, cut at what looks like to be about a 15-degree angle. So for an example here, if we're looking at the end, let's play pretend here and say that this is our leg, 15-degree angle here, 15-degree angle here, This will be our bottom. This is going to be our top here. Then I would inset this in, leaving maybe about an inch of overhang. So we know the material and the angles that they've used for the legs. So I can go ahead and get 4 of those cut at about 16 inches long. Then to assemble each leg, take 2 of these, lay them on a flat surface. And then at the very top of your 2 legs, it looks like that they've actually used maybe like a 1.5 by 1.5 material, probably 10 inches long based on the width of the top. So then you would just take your 10-inch board, put the same 15-degree angle on each side, then attach it laying flat on the top. You could just use regular exterior deck screws for that. And now that you have the top support and your angles locked in, I would just measure up for your bottom support about 4 inches on each side. Then whatever that distance is there, they've used a 2x4, cut at a 15-degree angle on both sides. Then you would install it just like you did your other one. And that's all that there is to the legs. Now let's go ahead and attach the top to the legs. I go ahead and lay the 2 boards for my top out on a flat surface, turn these legs upside down, move them in about 6 inches from each edge, then actually screw from the bottom of that board into your bench seat. I would do this on both sides, and then to make sure that this bench seat is really stable, I'd actually turn this back upside down and then put some screws in from the top as well. That way it's supported from both sides, and it's also going to help to stabilize those legs. And then for the angled supports, they've used 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches material. They put a 45-degree angle on both sides, then attached it to the bottom leg support. They've used a lag bolt just for easy assembly, but again, I would counterbore and throw in some exterior screws. Once you have that done, that's it. And I forgot to mention something earlier. They are wanting $240 for these things. You could build several full-size picnic tables for that, but $240 for this 4-foot bench that you would probably have less than $10 in material in. Now, what would you sell this for? It's really hard to put a price on something because the prices for things in different areas vary so much. First number that popped into my head was maybe $100 to $120 a piece, but you'll just have to test it out for yourself. Regardless of whether you're getting $75 or $240 like they are, the profit margins are still crazy. So this is a winner. Okay, so this next one caught my eye for several different reasons, and the first one being the price. This particular handmade rustic fire pit cover is selling for $650. But just looking online, they're all selling for $400 and up. The next thing that caught my eye was how this thing was built. This would be a simple build. And then the most important thing that I noticed is this cover is actually a multi-use product. So there's several different reasons why we want to cover our fire pits. One thing, it's unsightly and full of ashes, and if you have kids, grandkids, anything like that, you don't want them playing in it. And of course, you know the first place that they're going to go there, and then they're going to have ashes all over their face and on their clothes and all that good stuff. So in one use, it actually hides something that may be unsightly. And the next use is you can actually use this thing as a tabletop. So now you've taken a fire pit that you're kind of staying away from because it's full of ashes. Now you could actually put chairs around it and actually use it as a tabletop. And almost every house out there has some sort of a fire pit of some kind. So then I had the thought that if these things are selling for that much, what if you actually personalize these things? So if you have a laser, CNC, anything like that, you could even use stencils. But any type of personalization onto the front of this, these things will sell like crazy. Now, would I personally try to sell them for $650? Really just depends on what I could get out of them. But just by looking at this, I know that I could make these things, and I know that I could sell them and make a huge profit from it. You know what else this reminded me of that has always been a great seller? Stovetop covers. Stovetop covers have been a huge seller for a long time, and essentially this is a giant stovetop cover that will sell just as well. So let's break this down real quick. Now, one of the first things that you're going to notice is it's a circle. Okay, so there's a lot of people that do not like cutting circles, but there are a ton of different ways and a ton of different videos out there on how to cut a perfect circle. But probably the easiest way to cut these circles would be to make a jig for a jigsaw or a router. But regardless of how you decide to cut these rounds, let's go and talk about how they've actually assembled this thing. So for this one, if you were looking at it from up above, it looks like that it's actually glue joints and that it's a perfectly finished top and all of that. Well, this is going to be sitting outside. It's going to be sitting over something that the ashes may have some heat still left in it. Maybe not enough to catch this thing on fire, hopefully. Still going to have enough to dry the wood out. So this wood's going to be constantly moving. So there's no need for glue joints and all of that. But what there will be a need for is 2 layers. If you look at it from the side, it's not a glue joint and it's actually advertised as rustic. So you can actually see the edges of the different boards and things like that. Personally, I like that look. But you'll also notice that it is 2 different 3/4 of an inch layers. So you'll need to make 2 of these rounds. Okay, so what about the material? This one's actually advertised as pine, so we'll stick with pine. This particular cover is 32 inches across. You can make these smaller, you can make these larger, just add extra material. But whatever the size that you want this thing, you will need to start off with a square that size. So we'll at least need a 32-inch square for each layer. And you're going to have a couple of different options for this. Let's say that you chose to use 1x6 pine, which is actually going to be 3/4 by 5.5 inches. So with 5.5-inch material, you'll be needing 6 boards that are 32 inches long. Now, if you didn't mind that it was just a little less than 32 inches, you could actually get this out of 2 boards that are 8 foot long. But if for me, just to be on the safe side, I would go ahead and get 10-foot boards. Or if you wanted to save even more money, because a standard 1x6 is actually more expensive than a 2x6, you could buy a 2x6 for less than $5 and then rip that in half. You could use a bandsaw if you had a bandsaw, or you could cut your 2-inch material to length so it's easier to handle. Then set up your table saw at 2 3/4, because most table saws with a 10-inch blade can handle up to 3-inch cuts. Make one cut through the center of that board, and then flip the board over and run it back through, completing your 5.5-inch cut. And then you have 2 boards for less than the price of 1. But regardless of how you get the material for this, the next step will be to attach those boards together, making your square. If it were me, I'd lay this thing out in my square, maybe put a screw in the very center, tie a pencil onto a string, bring it out to 16 inches, and then draw my circle. Now with your circle drawn on your board, you know where you'll be cutting and not to put a screw. So on the inside of that circle, I throw in a few pocket hole screws on the bottom of these boards, and then do the exact same thing for my second one. After you get that done, you can cut this out however that you would like. So now that you have your 2 circles cut out, now it's time to join those 2 together. Now this is one of the most important parts. The reason why there are 2 layers to this thing is because this wood is going to be moving. You're going to have the sun beating down on it, wanting to warp this material up. So you're going to need something to hold everything into place. So you will actually offset each one of these circles. So what I would do is to choose the one that you want to be your top. I would lay that face down on a table with the joints running straight away from me. Then the next circle, or the backer, you place it on top of the first one with the joints running the opposite direction. Once you have that in place, I would put several screws straight down through the back, joining those 2 together. And since the joints are running in opposite directions, it's going to make it very difficult for this thing to cup or bow. So while doing my research on this, I've actually seen some cheaper versions of this where they just put slats across the back. Well, I'm telling you now, anything that is 3/4 of an inch thick, that is not supported by anything on the edges and exposed to all of those different elements, it is definitely going to move. Then once you have your 2 layers put together, you'd actually stain this up or put an oil finish on this just to give it a nice look, and then install your 2 handles. Now with the handles, you can go with super cheap. You can pick them up for around $1, or you can go with some nice wrought iron handles or something like that and actually make this thing look super nice. So without the cost of the handles, because there's so many different options that you can choose from out there, essentially you can make one of these for around $5. And then the extra things would be up to you. If you wanted to add some personalization to it, they would sell a heck of a lot quicker. If you're comfortable using a router, take a router to the edges and just kind of smooth everything up, or put just a little bit of a design around there. Or if you cut this out using a jigsaw jig, you could actually angle the jigsaw itself down to around 30 degrees. You may have to shift it in just a hair, but run it again and it will actually put a bevel all the way around your circle. Just an idea. But with something like this, the sky is the limit. But once you're done, it will look awesome. So as easy as this thing is to make, definitely add it to your summertime build list. This next one I had to throw in there because it is so simple to build and people will buy multiples of these things. So check out these 13-inch tall decorative birdhouses. So they are selling these things for $47 for a set of 2. Okay, so that's not bad. They're advertising these as solid wood birdhouse decor, but if you look close at the holes for these things, they're just made out of 1/4 inch plywood. So these things are just intended for decoration. So people will set these things out. They'll set them on their porch. You could do different sizes because like we talked about earlier, everyone loves birds and bird houses, especially Martin boxes. And that is the look that they are trying to get with this, like an old school Martin box. They're not actually wanting to use these as bird houses, but with the way that they have these with the holes in them, they're going to get some kind of critters living up in there. But what does this look like? It's a 4x4. Now stay with me here just for a minute because I'm about to tell you of this other creative idea that I came up with for this that I haven't seen anywhere, and it's going to drop the already low cost that you're going to have in building these things even more. Okay, so if you use 4x4s for this, these are all 13 inches tall. I would honestly just go ahead and drop them down to 12. That way you can get that extra birdhouse out of it, but I'm going to use this dimension. 13 inches. Right now, an 8-foot 4x4 in my area is $15. But regardless whether you're using 12 inches, 13 inches, whatever, one end of this will actually have to form a peak. So the block itself, I would just mark it in the very center and then cut a 30-degree angle on each side. So at 13 inches long, you would be able to get 7 parts out of this, and then you just have to add your top. Now the top, you can use scrap wood. We all have these little 3 and 4 inch little pieces of scrap wood that you can use. If you don't for some reason, buy a fence picket, rip it down to 3.5 inches, and then just use little pieces for the roof. And then for the holes themselves, they are 1.5 inches in diameter. Personally, what I would do is actually lay this block out just on a 1/4 inch piece of plywood, trace it out, cut it out, and actually use that as a template. I'd measure up from the bottom, that'd be about 3 inches, and put my first hole, and then about 4 inches between that one and the top one. But I would go ahead and cut those out of my template using a spade or Forstner bit. That way, after I get this distressed the way that I wanted it, all I'd have to do is lay this template on top and then just spray paint on my holes. And if you wanted to add a little bit of depth to this, you could actually take your template, go down a little bit deeper first with your bit into the wood, and then you could spray those black. But that's just an idea. You do you. But the main expense for this is going to be the block itself. So not counting the cost of the roof, if you made 7 of these things, it would bring it down to $2.14 a piece. Not bad. So $2.14, the margins are crazy. I mean, that's awesome. But as I looked at these things, I got to thinking, what is even cheaper than a 4x4? Because whenever I looked it up, it was like $15, which is dirt cheap compared to what it was a year or two ago. But what is something kind of like a fence picket that never actually went up in price? Landscaping timbers. So for some reason, these things are always dirt cheap. They are 8 foot long and they are listed as a 3x4. So a landscaping timber will actually have the same width as a 4x4 if you go all the way out to the very edge. And the best thing about a landscaping timber is the price. Right now in my area, an 8-foot landscaping timber is $5.14. So we have our face width that is the same as a 4x4 that's going to cost me $15. So we've already brought our price down to around $2 to make these out of a 4x4. Out of a landscaping timber, you could make a 13-inch birdhouse for 74 cents. Okay, so now think of the profit margins on that. Even if you only sold them for 15 or 20 bucks a piece, you will have less than $1 in these things. And I think that these rounded edges will actually add more character to it. So I've just cut a couple of pieces here at 30 degrees. So then once you add your roof to this thing, with these rounded edges, it actually adds more dimension to this thing. I actually think that I like this version better, which I'm kind of picturing this thing, you know, distressed like this, just whitewashed and then the 2 holes in it. But if you can make these things for less than $1 using a landscaping timber, this is the type of item that I've talked to you about that everyone needs to have. The item that falls within that price range that everyone has as expendable money. And I think that this would be a perfect one that would sell in multiples and help to keep that cash flow going while you're working on your larger builds. Now, a lot of you guys out there watching are interested in building larger items, things like that, but if you're doing this to make money with woodworking, this is the type of item that you need. You need items in all different price ranges. Most important part, especially from the business aspect, is the margins. And the profit margins on this are out of this world. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, my goal is for you to have taken something away from this video, regardless of whether you decide to build any of these things. So for this video, use this last one as an example. What I want you to take away from this is not, you can build a birdhouse for 70-some cents, is that anytime that you are looking at anything, be it in woodworking, be it in life in general, do not just look at it for what it is. Look at it from what it could be from multiple different angles. Think divergently, see like no other. Visualize things in your head that other people have not thought about. So just like this as an example. So now that you know that you can get this material that is pretty darn close to a 4x4 for 1/3 of the price, so what could you make out of 4x4 material that you may put off because the cost is too high? And then visualize this in its place. Is it doable? And by thinking like that, you are thinking outside of the box and growing your creativity. Until next time, guys, we'll see ya.